Can you be good without God? We used to have a cura program in Philadelphia, and the fellow who ran it asked me to speak on this subject, and I was very concerned about it because in many people's minds, the answer is obvious. Of course you can. Aren't there non-religious people who are good? And, a little more bitter, aren't there religious people who aren't good? So of course you can be good without God. And sorry, time to go home and eat. Because if I have introduced that subject, it can't be quite that simple. So first of all, when you say good, you could be one of 106 things, but two important distinctions to make is between whether you're talking about good actions or good moral character. Those are two different dimensions, and they're independent of one another, and I'll show it to you. Peter fell into the raging river, and he's going to drown. George jumps in and, at risk to his own life, with great effort, pulls Peter out of the raging river, rolls him over, takes his wallet out of his back pocket, and runs. Because you see, George just wanted the money, and if he had been able to take the money out of Peter's pocket while he was in the water, he'd have done that and let him drown. George is motivated only by stealing money. It's just that he couldn't get the money out until he pulled Peter out of the water. So he did something good. He saved Peter's life. That's definitely good action. But his moral character is rotten, vicious. And the other way around. Someone has stopped. It's Chicago, January 17th, and it's sleeting, and the wind chill is minus 30 degrees, and somebody's car is stopped on the highway, and George drives up, and he opens his window. He says, "Problem? Yeah, it's stalled. I can't get it to start." And George says, "Let me take a look inside." He opens up the hood, and he connects this and wipes off that and tries that, pulls down the hood, says, "Okay, try it now." And the guy, well, those days you turned the key, but you can read about that in history books. So now you just think on, right? He thinks on, and there's a bang, and a puff of smoke comes out of the engine, and he's ruined the engine. George is a nice guy. It's wind chill minus 30 there. Got out of his, but he just fumbled it and ruined the guy's engine. So good actions are one thing, and good moral character is something else. So really we have two questions. Can your actions be good actions without God? And can you have good moral character without God? So let's take them each in turn. And I want to give you, thank you very much, some examples which I hope are trivial and obvious, and then I'll apply them to the question at hand. First of all, up until about 150 years ago, it was standard medical practice, if someone had a fever, to bleed him. Use leeches or suction cups to reduce his blood flow. We don't do that anymore. Can you guess why? Because actually, it's not good for a fever. It may even be injurious for a fever. We've discovered that. Now, what shall we say about the doctors 200 years ago who are bleeding people? They're actually doing the wrong thing. Their actions are, in fact, wrong. Not because there's any fault to their moral character, it's just that not knowing the truth of the matter, with all the best intentions, what they're doing is actually hurting people. Imagine a doctor who, in the last month of his life, receives the new research and understands that it was wrong. The 40 years of my medical practice, when I have been bleeding people who have fevers, I've actually been hurting them. Do you think he'll be upset by learning that? Do you think he'll feel some regret? Not that he has any fault in moral character. He's a kind person. He's a responsible person. He's doing what the best information that he had told him to do. It's just that what he was doing was bad. Here's another example. A family of parents and a son get separated during the Holocaust. Parents are together, the son is separate. Each thinks the other has died. The parents think the son has died. The son thinks the parents have died. So after the Holocaust, they don't even look for each other. They make their way to the United States. The son, who's young, who's intelligent, resourceful, learns English and learns how American economy works and makes a fortune. And he has a home in Beverly Hills. He's doing extremely well. And he's very charitable. Every month, on the second of the month, he puts money into a charity account, thousands and thousands of dollars. And people know that he gives out charity. They come to him all month long. And he gives out till he exhausts the charity account, till the second of the next month, when he puts in the next injection of money to this charity account. The parents coming to America at an older age and not having the same resourcefulness become beggars. They become beggars. They go from town to town, city to city. They arrive in Los Angeles on June 29th. And they get a list of charitable people in the city, and their son's name is on the list. Of course, they don't recognize. He's had his name changed at Ellis Island, the way it happened, and they don't recognize him. And on June 29th, they come to his door, they knock on the door, and he opens the door, and he doesn't recognize them, and they don't recognize him. And they ask him for charity, and he says, listen, I want you to know the June account is exhausted. On July 2nd, the new money will go into the account. If you come on July 3rd, I'll be glad to help you. And they say, we have a free ride to San Francisco on July 1st. We can't wait until July 3rd. And he says, I'm awfully sorry. This is how I give out charity. Every month I exhaust the account. This is how I give out the charity. If you're here, fine. If not, I can't help you. Turns them away. Okay, let's make it worse. On the trip to San Francisco, they get killed in an automobile accident. And some investigative reporter digs up their history and finds that they're Holocaust survivors and their original name was so-and-so, and it's in the Los Angeles Times. How is the son going to feel when he realizes that he turned his own parents away and they died? I think he's going to feel terrible, right? Not guilty. He shouldn't feel guilty. He didn't do anything wrong. He didn't do anything vicious, but the action was a terrible action. He was instrumental in his parents dying, and had he treated them differently, they wouldn't have died. One last example. You're taking a hike through the wild forest, the forest primeval, and you're hiking from place to place, and then you come across an area which is pretty clear, and there are fruit trees there. Fruit trees. And it's May or June, whichever, and the fruits are on the trees, on the leaves, on the branches, and some of them are ripe, and you think, wow, been hiking for 5 hours. This is wonderful. Look at this, right here in the forest. So you pick down some of the fruit, and you eat, and then you have a bag, and you put some fruit in the bag. As you're about to go on, you hear a voice from behind you, "Thief! Stop stealing my fruit!" And you think, what? Just in the middle of the forest. Turn around and see this guy there who's obviously very angry. You think, where are the guys in the white coats? How can you excuse me of stealing in the middle of the forest? And you say to him, I'm not, it's here, it's open, it's in the forest, anybody can take it. He says, you're on my land. And you think, where are the guys in the white coats? He thinks he owns the whole forest. And the guy says to you, let me show you something. Come with me in this direction. You walk with him in that direction, 50 yards, and there's a fence. There's a fence that goes off into the distance, and on the fence there are signs, private property, no trespassing. Now he says, come in this direction at right angles. He walks this way, 150 yards, and there's more fence with more signs. Private property, no trespassing. Someone has removed 100 yards of fencing from his fence. That's what happened. You happened to go through the empty space in where the fence was removed. So you had no idea. You had no idea that really is private property. Really, the fruit isn't available for anyone just to take. What do you do now? Well, the first thing I think you do is you give him back the fruit that you have in the bag. He said, "Okay, so sorry, and you might even offer to pay for the fruit that you ate because you actually stole some person's fruit. You didn't know that, you weren't aware of that, but as a matter of fact, that's what you were doing." I'm going to stop to take questions. I want to tell you what I see as the moral from these questions. Whether or not an action is good depends upon the real circumstances under which the action is performed. And if a person is ignorant of the real circumstances, then he can do things that are terribly wrong without even knowing it. So in order to improve the efficiency of your actions being good, you need to know the real circumstances that apply. And if you're ignorant of the real circumstances, especially some global circumstance, then it's for certain that many of your actions are going to be bad because you don't know the circumstances under which you're operating. Yeah.
Okay, so in this last scenario you gave with the fruits, how culpable is one for this? Like, let's say that there was no owner to tell him, then he eventually just walks back out without ever seeing a fence or anything. Is he chayav, or is this considered an onus?
This would be considered an onus for sure. To be responsible, either you have to know, or you have to have had a responsibility to know, and you didn't fulfill that responsibility. That can make you feel.
Even in the
but
eyes
he's,
of Shemaim,
huh?
or just even in the eyes of Shemaim, or just in the eyes of legal?
No, even in the eyes of Shemaim. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yes.
I think nobody but God can see the whole picture
Right.
of anything. Obviously, there's always going to be, issues. No, I think you have to, try your best to know as much as you can at the time with the information you have, and then do the best you can. with the
100%.
information you have.
But remember, even if you do the best that you can,
Sometimes you'll mess up.
okay, and what was the question we were discussing? We were discussing whether your actions will be good actions. We weren't discussing whether you're responsible or culpable or should be criticized in any way. We're only discussing. So 1 second. So you just said sometimes you'll mess up, which means sometimes your actions will be bad
No.
actions.
Sometimes your actions will hurt people. Meaning, if you did something with the best of intentions and unfortunately hurt somebody, despite using your best judgment to help,
Right.
to a certain extent, yes, you are guilty, but at the same time, you are also innocent and did a mitzvah by
Listen,
trying to help.
you're switching from the action to the person. You said you're innocent. I'm not talking about the person being innocent. I'm talking about the action being a bad action. I started at the beginning of the hour giving you examples of a person whose moral character is rotten, who does something good, and a person whose moral character is good, who does something bad. That's to distinguish
A
between.
good deed is a good deed and a bad deed is a bad deed.
I hope by deed you mean action. Yes,
Yes.
there are good and bad actions, and there are good and bad people.
The
And a good
outcomes
person,
can also matter as well.
of course, that will determine whether it's a good action or not.
So, there you have it.
But it has nothing to do with the person. He may not know what the outcome will be. If he doesn't know
No, the person should do the utmost to make sure that his
God
action
only
is-
protects him from guilt. It doesn't rehabilitate the action to make it a good action. They're different. You're still not
Good is
distinct.
okay. Good would be defined by, as Jews, we would define it as the Hilchot of the Torah and what we are told according to Chazal and according to all of our sources is good.
Well, but even there, the same distinction applies in the direction in which I'm going. Suppose a person doesn't know the laws of Shabbos, and he does something which violates the laws of Shabbos. The action is a bad action. It violated the laws of Shabbos. He may not be guilty because he may not be responsible to know it, given where he was born and who his parents were and what kind of context in which he grew up. But that doesn't mean that objectively it's a good action. It's a bad action because it violates Shabbos. So that's all I want. I wanted you to focus now on the actions as opposed to the responsibility of the individual. Now, I suggest to you the existence of a creator who created and runs the world and has plans for it, and who has revealed his will as to how it should be, how you should live in the world. I think that's a giant fact. And if someone doesn't take that fact into account when he's making his decisions, a lot of his actions are going to be objectively wrong because they violate the will of the Creator. Just like walking into the other guy's property where there's no fence is objectively wrong because it's private property. Just like turning away these people from your door who didn't come on the right charity days is a bad action because your parents got killed. Just as bleeding people who have fevers is a bad action because it hurts them medically, even though you didn't know any better. When you don't know the facts, then you are going to perform actions which are objectively bad. And one giant fact is the fact that there is a creator of the universe and he has a will about how the world should be run. If you leave that fact out of your picture, then you are going to do actions which, according to that fact, are going to be gigantically wrong. Yeah.
Okay, so in my question previously, we established that, if you're operating with the most information you have and you make a judgment, and even though it's technically the wrong one, but you can only find it out after you actually have all the facts, that's considered like an onus on your part and you're not liable. Do we find any exceptions to this idea in Tanakh at all, where someone is liable, even though they didn't necessarily have all the facts, but they necessarily...
No, but you're still not focusing on my question. Liable isn't the description of an action, it's the description of a person. Liable means you have to make amends. Liable means that you should be criticized. Liable means maybe that you should be punished. I'm not talking about the status of the person. I'm talking about the status of the action. Only the status of the action. You have to shift your focus and focus only on whether it was a good thing to do or a bad thing to do, not whether the person is liable for what he did. Liable and responsible are descriptions of people, not descriptions of actions. And when you don't know the truth, it can be a terrible thing to do. That's why the doctor, when he finds out just before he dies that he's been bleeding people and has been hurting them, feels regret. Why does he feel regret? He's not guilty of ignorance. He's not guilty of it. He's not guilty of mismanagement. He's not guilty of morally bad character. He feels regret because he did things that hurt people. Things that shouldn't have been done, he did. No one knew they shouldn't have been done, so you can't blame him. But on the other hand, he feels regret that he did things which were bad, things that hurt people. And that's exactly what I'm talking about when I say that if you have to take into account if there is a creator, and if he is running the world, and if he does have directions as to how one should live in the world, that's a gigantic fact which will have a tremendous effect on whether the actions you perform are good actions or bad actions. And if you don't take that into account, if you're living without God, living without religion, living without any understanding or knowledge of the Creator, then you're going to mess up very often because you don't have that background of information, which in large part determines whether what you do is good or bad. That's the point of these examples.
There are some cases where you do an action that had you not been Jewish and doing it because it's the Ratzon Hashem, it's a mitzvah, it would be a neutral action. It's only a commandment, it's only a positive thing because Hashem commands it to be so. A non-Jew walks up and takes a lulu, an esrog, a dasim, and a rubber, shakes it around. He didn't do a mitzvah. That's a neutral action. You do it on Sukkot, and you're trying to become the Torah, and now you've done a mitzvah. That action became a positive action because HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded it. These are actions which others not.
Yeah.
Or a non-Jew goes and kills an Amaleki. That's a Ritzicha from a guy, but a Jew kills an Amaleki. All of a sudden, you've done a mitzvah. That action of murder has suddenly become a mitzvah.
Well, first of all, I would not accept the way you're putting it in detail. First of all, the forces that I know do not have any mitzvah today to kill an Amaleki. That's a mistake. It's just a mistake in halacha. But as a matter of fact, you only get credit for doing a mitzvah if you intend that your action should satisfy a divine command. So it isn't as if, oh, it's the springtime, and I see all these palm fronds around, and I feel, I like wavy things and the music and so on. And just because there's a mitzvah, that isn't going to do it. Right. You have to know that there's a creator. Well, but then you're putting the context in that I want. Right. But then that's not going to help you illustrate anything. It isn't as if God's command made it so. It's you're knowing that it's God's command, and you're deciding to obey God's command that makes it into a mitzvah.
Right, it's like a person that doesn't.
Okay, but I'm not sure how does it relate now to the proposition I'm considering. The proposition I'm considering is this: we started with the question, can you be good without God? And the first answer that I'm giving is, if you're talking about good actions, and you don't take God into account, then a lot of your actions are going to be bad because they violate factual context of the action, which you're unaware of. And then objectively, they're going to be bad
Again,
actions.
as I was making, there will also be actions that would only be considered good deeds unless they're done because you're following Mitzvah Hashem. There'll be another example of something without God. Shaking a lulav and esrog wouldn't be a mitzvah. It wouldn't be any.
Oh, that's something else. Okay, I thought you were. I think
No,
the words were going the other way. Right, that's right. But there, I'm now talking about the existence of the objective context. I'm not talking about the person knowing it, the person using it in his intentions. I'm distinguishing between the person and the action. I'm giving the person the benefit of all of what he needs in moral terms. Okay, so that's
You look at the action
that's that.
itself.
And as a matter of fact, extending this idea just a little bit, I'm particularly sensitive to this because I was brought up Reform, and we weren't taught this actually. Can you be good without God has another dimension. Let me give you a parallel, and then I'll show you how it applies here. Suppose say, what kind of person is George? In particular, what about his moral character? Oh, listen, he's helpful to people, and he's kind, and he pursues justice, and he provides for his family, and he takes part in community affairs, and he's an active citizen of the country, and he's willing to sacrifice for the things that he believes in. And so he's really a model person. And then I ask, how does he treat his parents? Oh. Well, it's unfortunate that you asked that, because actually, he's not very nice to his parents. I said, well, wait a second, one of your moral responsibilities is how you treat your parents, that he's not nice to his parents. So how could you say that he's morally, he has this sterling moral character? At least there's a stain on his character. Okay, now let me try the parallel. I have moral responsibilities to all sorts of other people. What about moral responsibilities to the Creator? Do I have moral responsibilities to the Creator? Is there anything about the relationship between the Creator and us that creates moral responsibilities? So I could ask, how is your moral performance vis-a-vis your responsibilities to your Creator? Let me give you two examples. This is part of a much larger project, which I've never undertaken. I wonder if somebody did, but here are two examples. Arguably, in the case of the son in Beverly Hills and his parents standing there, one of the horrors of that story is that he owes an awful lot to his parents. He has a gigantic debt of gratitude to them, and here he acts in complete ignorance of that debt of gratitude. What creates a debt of gratitude? It's that some agent benefits my life in some way, and you could put in, although this is discussable, you could put in that he does so out of his own goodness of character. Doesn't do it for a profit on his part or something else. Out of his goodness of character, he does something that benefits my life. That creates an obligation on me, a moral obligation. So, for example, I'm drowning in the river, and George jumps in and saves my life. And then 2 weeks later, George calls me up on the phone and says, could you lend me $500? Simultaneously, someone from down the block, whom I know casually, comes in and says, could you lend me $500? And I have exactly $500 to lend. And I say, listen, George wants 500, and he wants 500, and I have 500. I'll flip a coin. Heads, it's George. Tails, it's my neighbor. Is that morally competent? Is that morally okay? George saved my life. And the fellow down the street is a casual acquaintance. Don't I owe George something if he saved my life? Isn't that morally grotesque if I flip a coin between someone who saved my life and someone to whom I owe nothing? So gratitude is a moral obligation, and it's created by someone, some agent, out of goodness of character, benefits me. This concept of gratitude applies to every such agent. It applies to your parents, it applies to your teachers, it applies to your friends. your neighbors, anyone who's benefited you out of the goodness of his character creates a moral debt. By the way, in an older form of English, if you ask someone for a favor, he could often answer you, happy to oblige. Think what that means. When I do you a favor, I'm obliging you. I'm creating an obligation on you because I've done you a favor, okay? So now, ask yourself, does God do anything good for you? I mean, isn't the list endless? Isn't the list beyond belief? That doesn't cancel out your parents. It doesn't cancel out your teachers. Everyone who benefits you out of the goodness of his character creates a moral obligation of gratitude. But God's moral obligation of gratitude is gigantic. So if you don't take God into account, if there is a reality that's a creator, and he treats you this way, then you are not living up to your moral obligation of gratitude. And that way your actions aren't moral, many of your actions aren't morally good because you're not acting in a way that would fulfill that obligation of gratitude. So there's a very deep implication here, especially for anybody who has a background like mine. When God says put on tefillin, what's the status of that command? What relationship do I have to that command? Well, if I take into account that he gives me my life and my health and my intelligence and my resources and all the rest, so I owe him a gigantic amount, and he says, and I want a half hour every morning with leather boxes and leather straps. And I think, let's see, given he provides me with all of this, is half hour with leather box and leather straps, within the limits of the debt? Now, if you're an American, you probably have to work this out in detail and think, because you have a resistance to being told what to do. But if you can free yourself from that prejudice for a moment, it seems to me that your life and your health and everything else is certainly enough of a debt of gratitude to justify being required to wear tefillin in the morning. So a person who doesn't wear tefillin in the morning isn't morally perfect, because he's not living up to a moral responsibility. That's an implication from that example. And the implication from the fruit example is this. There's a concept of property. Ownership. Ownership carries with it certain requirements of behavior. If you own something, I can't deprive you of it without your agreement. I can't damage it without your agreement. Certain things that I can't do because you own it. Yes, you could say that God's commands create ownership. You could say that, but it's wrong. I'm not going to go into it. I'm going to go into it for now. Look at Shara Yosher, Shara Daled Perek Beis. So now, when you say, going through the gap in the fence, and the owner appears and shows you that it's private property, you think, oh my God, it's really private property. I really took somebody's fruit. That's not nice. And you want to give back the fruit you have in the bag and pay for the fruit that you ate. Well, think now, if there's a creator who created and maintains the existence of the whole of the universe. I think he owns it. There's some clever, tricky cases in philosophy about what counts as ownership, but creating something out of nothing is definitely a condition of ownership. And then, when God says, don't eat pigs to Jews, if a Jew eats a pig, he's a thief. He's a thief. He's stealing something that isn't his. So he has a moral responsibility to fulfill the law of not eating pigs. The bottom line here is you have a moral responsibility, a moral relationship with the Creator. That Creator has various different aspects. I'm talking about gratitude and ownership. There may be a dozen more. I haven't done an exhaustive list, and I haven't tried to sum it up, which would be a wonderful project. But there definitely are moral responsibilities there. So again, if you don't take into account the existence of the Creator, the morality of your actions is going to be very, very derelict. Not everything will be wrong, but a lot of things will be wrong because you're not taking into account those moral responsibilities. This, by the way, undermines the distinction with which I was raised between moral commandments and ritual commandments, where if you violate a moral commandment, then you do something immoral, and that's not good. And if you violate a ritual commandment, then you're not a ritual, which is sort of take it or leave it, Might be secondary, but it's certainly not primary. So this, again, I think enforces the idea that if there is a God, let me just take this to the conclusion we can discuss for the rest of the hour. If there is a God, and if he does create the world and provide us with what's available in the world and guides the world, if that's true, then it's a fact which changes a lot about what you think when you think of doing actions that are good. So that being the case, one at least ought to have an informed opinion on this subject. Knowing that, if this is true, then it's going to change the goodness of your actions. It's worthy of investigation. Not just because it could be true, because an awful lot of very intelligent people think today and have thought throughout history that it's true. So it's not just made up, not just an invented idea which could be true. There's a lot of people who are quite intelligent, well-informed, who believe it. It's at least worthy of an investigation to find out whether this background set of facts exists so that you can try to determine that your actions should be good actions. That's the bottom line of the first half of the thing. Yeah.
So are also including in what there are people in this class that people that are not holding that the Torah is true?
Again, we're talking. Let's go back to the doctor. The doctor's bleeding people. He thinks he's doing the right thing. I'm leaving him his thoughts out now. I'm asking, is his action good or bad?
I understand that. I just talk about
So,
the question of the class.
but then we're not talking about people. We're talking about actions. Now, of course, different
It was a
people,
good action.
different people have different responsibilities. If you're a father and you have children, you have responsibilities that a single person doesn't have. If you're born a Jew, then you have responsibilities that a non-Jew doesn't have. But I don't see why this.
The question the Rabbi asks is that, can you be good without God? So
Yeah.
If someone don't hold that the Torah is true, people that don't hold that the Torah is true also included in this question?
Of course, they're the prime examples of this question. Because what I'm saying is, since the Torah is true, then their actions won't be good, even though they don't know it. My examples were all examples of people who didn't know that their actions were bad. Those were all the examples. They all didn't know that their actions were bad, but they really were bad. People who think that the Torah isn't true, if it really is true, are doing very badly. That's my point. That's exactly my point. Yeah.
Along similar lines, I mean, we have the concept of Tinok Shanishba.
Mhm.
So does Hashem, for people who are completely ignorant, that they've never been exposed to the Torah, does Hashem view their actions as being bad because they don't conform to the reality, that they don't conform to Torah reality? Or does Hashem consider it to be like a non-Jew who doesn't have the commandments, like their actions are good even if they go against certain aspects of the Torah, because that's just not something that's relevant to them and what they're supposed to do in the world?
The actions are bad because they are objectively obligated to perform those actions, even though they don't know it.
So for
Person's example.
right, so Tinok Shanishba Hashem still considers to be like they're not. He doesn't kind of make it proportional. I mean, the way that they
Again,
perfect themselves in this world.
you're combining together two subjects which I'm working very hard to keep apart. Tinok Shenishba is a category of person, and it determines his responsibility for his actions. I was leaving the person out. I was talking only about the actions themselves. When a person with no Jewish education, a Jew with no Jewish education, violates Shabbos, he's violating Shabbos. He's driving a car on Shabbos, that's a violation of the laws of Shabbos. How responsible is he? Is a separate question. That's judging the person, not judging the action.
I hear the responsibility aspect, but would Rabbi agree that this person who is driving on Shabbos lives his whole life can still end up achieving the exact tikkun Hashem wanted him to achieve in this world?
I think so, because Baruch Hu determines how much information will come his way, and therefore he'll determine what his responsibilities are.
Rabbi would say that this person who achieved the exact tikkun Hashem wanted him to achieve in this world still was committing bad actions while doing that.
Of course.
I just want to be
Yeah,
sure
but
those
yeah.
coexist. Okay, fine.
One thing has nothing to do with the other. That's the distinction that I'm making. Yeah.
In the example of the doctor, medicine is one of those fields that rapidly evolves. In fact, a lot of fields rapidly evolve. So teaching is another one of those examples of things that we thought were good become not good. If you weren't to act on the information you had at the time, would it be a bad act? So I'm asking,
But
And
you're
which one-
asking from the point of view of the person, not from the point of view of the action.
No, I'm
You're
asking
talking
from the point
about
of view of the action. If
No, you're not.
on
You're asking-
Tuesday he didn't know,
Yes.
no one knew. Was it a good action?
No, it wasn't a good action. They just know it wasn't a good action.
So,
But you're asking, you said, how shall he act? Shouldn't he act on the information that he has at the time, even though it's rapidly evolving? So you're asking about the person's decision, not on whether the action is a good action or a bad action. You're back to the person again.
somebody gives a man a pacemaker. Doctor gives a man a pacemaker. Is that a good action?
Well, it depends upon the person's medical condition. I mean, sometimes it's a mistake, and it's a bad action. Depends upon the person's medical condition.
Sometimes it's a flip of the coin, though. I mean,
So then
yeah.
it might not be good, or it might be good or bad. I mean, you don't know. I don't see how
But how is a person in a field where everything's up in the air supposed to make decisions at any point?
But again, you're switching now to making responsible decisions rather than asking whether the action as an action is good or bad. They're two separate considerations. I'll try to make the point this way. Imagine that you have two alternatives in front of you, and they're both bad. And then you make the decision to choose the lesser evil. You're familiar with that idea, right? Okay. The one you chose, was it an evil?
Yeah.
Of course, by definition, the lesser evil. So the fact that it's what you ought to do doesn't stop it from being evil. It is evil, it's just the lesser of two evils.
Does that mean that a person, or does that mean that if I believe I'm taking a path of two lesser evils, I should just not take either?
No, on the contrary. I'm pointing out, once you've decided that this one is the one you should do because it's the lesser evil, that doesn't convert it into good. In one case, you violate someone's rights. In the other case, you steal somebody's property. And you say, look, I'm awfully sorry that I have to steal appropriate your property. Why are you sorry? Because that's objectively wrong, right? But this wrong is a bigger one, and therefore I'm going to do this one. You apologize because he's being hurt, and he's being hurt in a way that the rules don't allow. Okay, you think this is a bigger rule, but he's really being hurt. He's really having something done to him that's not just. It's just, in this circumstance, there's nothing else to do. Yeah.
Religious people ever we're confronted with like the question of morality, we're making a moral argument, and we're confronted with the question, well, has morality changed for non-religious people? What's like the best response to give to them?
They ask, hasn't morality changed? Is that what
They
you're...
say like we make a moral argument for religion.
Yes.
They say morality has changed. But what was considered to be moral 100 years ago isn't considered moral anymore.
In other words, you're going to make a moral argument for religion.
Yes.
Well, usually that kind of argument is inherently false because you're appealing to the other person's current moral standards. What you're really trying to show him is that you, given your standards, shouldn't be opposed. Not proving abstractly that it is or is not correct, but it's an ad hominem argument. You, who are committed to these particular values, you shouldn't be opposed because our position really satisfies those moral values. But that's not a way to argue that it really is so. After all, we don't agree with a lot of what's contemporary morality. So that wouldn't be. And if he says it changes, yeah, if that's what his question is, I would say to him, so do you act on your moral principles or not? Because you're so convinced that things change, you just flip a coin now? You don't act on your moral principles? I don't want to do business with you. Thank you. No, thank you. Right? And I don't think he'd be willing to abandon all his moral principles, especially the ones that he wants to criticize us using. He doesn't want to abandon those moral principles because things are going to change. So he himself is not going to be consistent with that consideration. Yeah.
Is it still possible to do an objectively good action without Hashem, just by accident? Let me give an example. An Arab sheik is in Yerushalayim for some reason, and his car breaks down right in front of Ohr Somayach, walks in. He's so grateful they gave him something to drink and kept him in a cool office. He writes a big check to the Yeshivat. Is that a mitzvah? Did the guy do an objectively good act, even though he didn't do it because he doesn't believe in a Kadosh Baruch Hu? Can you do a good act, objectively good act, without a Kadosh Baruch Hu?
It's a tricky question. Maimonides writes in the Guide of the Perplexed that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will reward a person for doing a good action, even if no prophet commanded it. And he will punish him for doing a bad action, even though no prophet prohibited it. So there's no revelation on record. And he says in the laws of repentance, chapter 5, the beginning, that because we have free will, and he gave us the understanding on our own, with our own machshava and our own das, to understand good and evil. Now that has to be qualified in various ways, but it means you have your own understanding, and you have responsibility for acting on your understanding of what is good and what is evil. The problem is that there's a subtle ambiguity here, and I don't know how to resolve it. What's going on in this person's mind? Is it that I just see that this is good, and I just see that that's evil, and I see it. I see that it's so. On a par, as some philosophers say, by seeing that 7 plus 5 is 12. So you can see that, extorting money from widows who are going to be thrown out of their houses and live in the street is wrong. You just see that. And then you're going to be held responsible for those kinds of perceptions, those kinds of intuitions, those kinds of judgments. Then that would mean there is something which is really objectively good, even without Hakadosh Baruch Hu ordering it, and even just in terms of its own nature. That's one possibility. The other possibility is, who's the Rambam describing? He's not describing a Greek philosopher. He's not describing Aristotle. He's describing someone who, in crude terms, is a member of the club. He's describing someone who, of course, believes in the Creator, and of course believes in the living of the Torah at Sinai, and so forth and so on. So now, I believe in the Creator. I believe that He's my Creator. I believe that He gave the Torah at Sinai, and I see that X is good. It's just obvious to me that X is good. And I'm told that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created me that way. He created me to see that this is good. Well, couldn't I draw the conclusion then that He wants me to do it? Couldn't this be the substitute for prophecy? I'm not a prophet, but since He created me to see that it's good, and He's going to reward me for doing it, it's a fair inference that He wants me to do it. And then the religious element could be built into this description that the Rambam says. Now, the Rambam doesn't say it, so I'm very cautious.
And you can make a mistake.
Not the-
That's all. Right.
Yes, you can always make a mistake, but
So
that's a throwaway. Everybody can make, the Sanhedrin can make mistakes. That's not going to stop any of the argumentation. So I don't know whether to think that the thing is good and evil by itself without saying Kodesh Baruch Hu wants it, or whether no, you have to fill in, given the context, that Kodesh Baruch Hu wants it, and that's where the goodness. I don't know. I think it's quite, huh?
Non-Jew does one of the Shabbats they know claim.
So the Rambam says that a Ben Noach, through his actions, does earn the world to come if he keeps the laws of a Ben Noach because God commanded them to Moses. It's a very, very specific idea he has to have in his head. It can't just be, I feel like, preventing people from stealing because I think it's wrong. That's not good enough. According to the Rambam, that's not good enough. Now, I haven't surveyed all the opinions, but it just shows that it's not quite so as simple as it might sound. Yeah, are we together so far? Yeah.
Do you have a question?
Oh, I guess, so first I just have to get a baseline of where we're at. Okay, so we've established that if you're doing an action that in hindsight turns out to be bad, but with the knowledge you have at hand, you're doing it with the best of intentions and it's meant to be good and help or something, then that action in itself is good, right?
No, on the contrary. On the contrary.
Okay.
Just like the guy who took the fruit and he did it with all innocence of intention. When he finds out that it's really private property, he doesn't say, oh, but I had innocent intention, and therefore the action was good. He doesn't say that. What he says is, I took somebody's fruit, and I stole it, and I'm guilty. I have to make amends for it. Doesn't make it good. Does not make the action good.
And if he doesn't find out?
It was still bad. What difference does it make? The badness of it is he took the fruit from another human being without permission. That's what makes it bad, period.
Great. Perfect.
What I don't rehabilitate the action on the grounds that the person is innocent. The whole point of the argument up until now is to distinguish carefully between people and actions, and point out that the person can be perfectly innocent, can even be perfectly good, and just through the ignorance of facts do something that's bad. And the existence of God is a gigantic fact, and it'll make a big difference in what things are good and what things are bad. And therefore, a person who's concerned that his actions should be good should at least investigate whether this fact is true, in which case he's got to take it into account. That's the burden of this half of the argument.
Can we speak now as to the innocence of the person, the other half of the argument?
Well, I'm going to talk about moral character. That's the other half of the investigation. Talk about having morally good character or not. So I will do that, but not until I finish this. I'll probably do it tomorrow. Yeah.
So my question is, we discussed kind of gratitude. You've got to have gratitude to Hashem and to your parents and to kind of everybody in your life. But everybody in your life is kind of being, not used, but Hashem is channeling what you need through them. And to a certain extent, God is basically giving you everything. So isn't there a little bit of a, I guess, a question of like, I guess, how grateful should I be to the people rather than, should I be grateful to the manager, to the,
Gratitude is a very tricky issue in Jewish sources. I've sort of hinted at this before. I'm not going to do the whole issue now. Chaim Shmulevitz has a whole essay on gratitude. It's very tricky in Jewish sources. But here, I think that it's more obvious than that. In other words, you have a person who dispenses charity, and you give him money, and he gives out money to various people, right? But he chooses which people to give it to, and you tell him it's up to you. Just use it up and use it up in this way, and he gives it to you.
But by doing that, am I not believing that God is helping him choose me?
Sure, that means you should be grateful to both of them. You shouldn't eliminate the agent from the gratitude, because he gave it to you out of the goodness of his character. So I don't think that it eliminates that. These moral principles, maybe I'll finish with this. The question is whether these moral principles are themselves parts of Torah or not. And there is an argument by Rabbi Shimon Shkop, a little surprising to some people, that you can't regard, let's say, the obligation of gratitude as something which the Torah tells you to do. That can't be its whole meaning. And the reason is this. Many Svarim say one of the reasons to keep mitzvos is gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for what he gives you. I said that before, but I didn't stress it in this way. So you got to imagine someone who says, okay, I hear your system, I see the whole thing laid out, right? And there is a creator, and he provides me with a lot, and he has these rules to live by. So now I'm trying to make a decision. Shall I follow the rules, or shall I not follow the rules? Shall I follow the rules, or shall I not follow the rules? Suppose somebody says, but one of the rules is you have to show gratitude. They'll say, I hear that, okay. But my question is, shall I or shall I not follow the rules? You can't convince me to follow the rules by saying that one of the rules says I have to follow the rules. My question is outside. I'm standing outside the whole system, and I want to know whether I should follow the rules or not. And to this, many Sfarim say, well, you have an obligation of gratitude to the Creator for everything that He gave you, and that obligation is a reason that you should live up to the rules. If you use gratitude as a reason for living up to the rules, then you've got to be convinced that gratitude is binding before you hear the rules, independently of hearing the rules. It's a prior condition for accepting the rules. So it can't be that the obligation for gratitude is only because the Torah tells you to show gratitude. Otherwise, those Svarim that say this would be presenting an incoherent argument. So at the very least, you have to be able to see, like this is 10% of what you asked. It's just a gesture in that direction. You have to see that there's something which you can recognize as good and morally binding, moral obligation, without having it been part of the rules that HaKadosh Baruch Hu lays down for you to live by. That has to be possible. Okay. So the bottom line is, people who are interested in performing good actions need to have an investigation to see whether this set of facts is correct. Moral character is something else. Moral character is the values that you have, the priorities that you have, the sense of responsibility, the commitments, the ability to take your own interests and at least to a certain extent subordinate them to the requirements that morality puts on you. That is required for good moral character. I'm hesitating because there is a famous issue in contemporary philosophy, which is, and the people who raise it are really clear that they haven't satisfactorily understood it. Let's suppose, I'm thinking about general morality now, leave the Torah out of it for a second. So suppose someone is drowning and you can save his life, but he's in the water, and to save his life, you're going to have to get your suit dry cleaned. Okay, but you're saving his life. Okay. Let's say it's going to cost you $10 to get your suit dry cleaned. But you do it. You think, I certainly have a moral responsibility to do that. Okay. Now, supposedly, this is a fact, there are people in the world for whom $10 will make the difference between life and death. They haven't got unpolluted drinking water, they haven't got access to medicine, they haven't got access to food, they're in areas where there are wars and they need to get out of there. $10 to that person in Sudan or Nigeria or who knows where will be the difference between life and death. $10. Well, if you'd be willing to dry clean your suit for $10, shouldn't you spend $10 to save that person? Yeah, but there are 32 million of them. Each one can be saved for $10. So now what do? Are you obligated to give up everything you have? To give up all your property up to the point of where you can just barely survive so as to save each one for $10? Are you obligated to do that? According to this argument, it sounds like you are. Most people's moral intuition rebels and say that my obligation, even to save people from death, has a certain limit. But it's very hard to justify. It's very hard to explain on general moral terms to justify how much you have. Now, all moral argument is based on certain very strong intuitions that this is required. So, for a person to say, well, the argument says you have to do it, so you have to do it, and your intuitions are just junk, that's just your selfishness talking. He's forgetting where he's coming from. Peter Singer makes this mistake all the time. He's forgetting where morality comes from. The same moral intuition that tells me $10 should be used to save someone's life also tells me that to require of everyone to vastly change their life circumstances is also inappropriate. And there's a clash between those two intuitions. And no one has, to my knowledge, I don't have encyclopedic knowledge of language, literature and ethics. So far as I know, I saw Thomas Nagel write about this, and Bernard Williams and other people. No one has got a good way to describe how much and when, under what conditions, and then you say, okay, now everything works out. We haven't got that. But this is it's a very difficult question about how you use what you have. Now, in halacha, there are tshuvas about these kinds of things. For example, let's suppose a person could earn $1,000 an hour. That's what he does. So he could earn a phenomenal amount of money during the year. And if he put it into supporting people learning, tens of thousands of people could be supported in learning on the basis of what he could earn. Does he have the right not to work? Does he have the right to take off any time to learn on it for himself? And the general answer is you have a responsibility for your own learning, and you are not required to spend all your time learning to earn money so that many more people can learn. You're not required to do that. How much you should do and under what conditions, you have to go to someone who has encyclopedic knowledge of the Torah. It's a tzaddik, and he can tell you how to apply it to your life. But these questions of measuring the amounts of what's good and what's responsible. In our literature, because people face these as practical questions, there is literature on it. In general morality, you don't have such a literature. But our literature doesn't solve the moral problem, it circumvents the moral problem. When you have a creator, and his moral authority is what determines the outcome, that means abstract moral reasoning didn't do the job. We have a different moral outlook, and there the job is done, but it's not the same job. You're not solving the moral problem. You're avoiding the moral problem by using a moral authority who trumps the reasoning of general moral reasoning. So there are going to be ambiguities. So tomorrow, what I will do is I'll review what we said today, because after 24 hours, you may have other questions to ask about it. And then we'll talk about whether you can have good moral character without God. Okay?